Pray. Grant, O Lord, that we might be the masters of ourselves to become the servants of others. Take our minds and think through them. Take our lips and speak through them. Take our hearts and set them on fire for Thee. Amen. Well, that gospel story you just heard a moment ago, Jesus at a wedding reception in Cana, that to me just confirms a truth that I have learned along the way, and probably you know it too, and that is that if you go to enough weddings, you will see some very interesting things happen. I have been going to weddings and officiating at weddings for a very long time now, and I have married people on ski slopes, alongside a riverbank, in train stations. Against my better judgment, once relented and in an effort to be cool and relevant, I did a wedding in a bar once where, unbeknownst to me, the couple had invited everybody to a pre-wedding happy hour 2 hours prior to the service. Note to self, never again will that happen. You can, the truth is, weddings can go haywire pretty easily without a 2-hour happy hour to precipitate the problems. And it's easy to see why that can happen when you think about it. You put a nervous bride and groom in front of a group of people. There maybe most of folks aren't used to being in front of large groups. So you put a bride and groom who are already nervous in front of people. You throw in a photographer and a couple of charming 2-year-olds in formal clothes whose job is to act like little adults and stand still for the whole, it's something wacky is often going to result when you do that. And I remember my very first wedding as a minister, a little church in southwestern Colorado. I married a delightful couple, kind of leftover flower children from the 60s, and they wanted an outdoor wedding and insisted that their Labrador Retriever, Sadie, be allowed to serve as the flower girl. Sadie would have a bouquet tied to her collar, and she would walk down the aisle ahead of the bride, accompanied by the bride's 4-year-old nephew, who was going to be the ring bearer. And I was brand new to the wedding business. I didn't know whether, how much power I had to say yes or no to that. And I had a lot of anxiety. First of all, I wasn't a rank green clergyman trying to do the wedding, and I tried to persuade them to leave the dog out of it. Just have the ring bearer. I said, well, who knows what the dog's going to do? But no, she'll be fine, and she's part of our family, and we want her there. And so I relented, and on the day of the wedding, when the moment of truth came for the processional, I got out with the groom in the front there in motion. We were outdoors, but had little 2 banks of chairs, and I motioned for the processional to start. And it was the first to come in was the bridesmaid, and then the ring bearer was to come next, followed by the dog. But the ring bearer, the 4-year-old, he wouldn't come. He had this. He started shaking his head, and his grandma kind of pushed him a little bit, and he then just threw a tantrum. He threw the pillow down, and he cried, and he stomped his feet, and he ran off, kind of toward the woods with Grandma in hot pursuit. And next up was the dog, and she did perfectly. She came right down, and proudly with her head up and the little bouquet on her collar, and she sat right next to the bride, right where she was supposed to be. And the groom leaned over and said, "Dude, you were worried about the wrong thing." But it's a long introduction to say, things go sometimes not as you expect in weddings. And I take comfort in knowing that even Jesus himself found things happening at weddings that would have been a surprise to him, and maybe something of a challenge. That's what this story is about, isn't it, John 2? We don't know from the passage who the bride and groom are in the wedding at Cana, though scholars speculate it might have been John himself, John the gospel writer. Others think it may have been one of Jesus' sisters. It's likely that it was somebody who was a close friend or family member of Jesus, because it is Jesus' mother, right, Mary, who's in charge of the reception. So it's somebody connected closely, probably a family member. It's Mary who is keeping watch over the banquet table at the reception to see that all is going okay, and she's the first one to realize that there is kind of a crisis in the making. The crisis being that the wine supply is running low. And I know that doesn't sound like much of a crisis when you first hear it, but some cultural background is probably worth noticing. In first century Near Eastern culture, wedding feasts were taken with great seriousness. I mean, wedding feasts were kind of the one social bright spot in a life that in many ways was pretty harsh and difficult for a lot of people. Weddings were the exception. That was when the party really got rolling. And the general expectation in first century Near Eastern culture was this, that basically for a full week following the wedding of your family member, a daughter or son, the newlyweds were expected to be honored in the community as kind of the celebrities for the week, these newly married couple. And in return, the couple's family was responsible for providing this sort of inexhaustible buffet table throughout the week as people drop by to send their good wishes, to bring gifts, celebration. It was the family of the bride and groom who were supposed to be there to keep the buffet stocked. And to fail in that duty would be a noteworthy social embarrassment. And it would also basically get the newlyweds off kind of on the wrong foot in their marriage among the community. They hadn't lived up to the expectations. So, Mary sees the wine running low, and what a relief it must have been to her with this crisis building to look up and see that Jesus has shown up for the reception. John says that she goes over and confidently presents him with the problem. They have no wine, she says, and which is kind of interesting in itself. Unlike some moms, she doesn't feel compelled to tell him what he ought to do about that. My mom would have not only told me the problem, she probably would have told me what I needed to do to fix it. No, just identifies the problem, gives him the facts, and trusts him to do the right thing. And when wine gave out, John says, Mary, the mother of Jesus, went unto him and said, they have no wine. And you can tell from what comes next that Jesus has to think this over a little bit. You get a hint in this passage that it's not first on his list to go and show up for this reception and do something dramatic here. Even though the problem is real, he has just begun his itinerant ministry, right? The chapter before this records him being baptized. This is like day one on the job in his adult ministry. And you get a hint that, because folks don't know him yet, he has some concern about what people might think if they see him respond, transforming water into wine. It was something of a defining moment for him, which actually, kind of comes to all of us sooner or later. We are faced with a need that comes at an inconvenient time. Everybody's had that experience at some time or other. We know what to do, but we also know that there's potentially a cost to us for doing it. And so the question becomes, will we follow our timetable, or will we respond to the needs of others and serve as we can and just let the chips fall where they may with respect to whether it goes good for us or not? And in the story, interestingly enough, Mary has great confidence that Jesus is going to do the right thing. Maybe at this point, Mary knows her son better than anybody else, for in this crucial moment of decision, all she does is says to the servants, just do whatever he tells you. Give him whatever he needs, and he'll respond in the right way. And respond, of course, that's exactly what he does. He steps up, and the water becomes wine, and the crisis is averted. And I have to say that for most of my life, when I've read this passage, I don't know how many times I've read it, many, many times, I always assumed that really the central point of the wedding at Cana story is that sometimes you have to step up, even when you might rather hold, there might be a cost to you. You know, my hour's not yet come, woman. They don't know me yet. I'm not really quite ready to be thrown into the fray. But that's only a temporary pause. And he gets right. I always thought that was the central theme of the story. Stepping up, realizing by example that God doesn't want us to hold back when there's a need in front of us. And miracles literally happen when people of faith come to the realization that we can't wait for an opportune time to serve. We can't always wait till it's convenient. We can't wait for other people to do the hard work of caring, building a compassionate community. You just don't hold back. Do your part. Let the chips fall where they may. I thought that was really the central point of the story. And I do think it's a good point and worth saying. But a while back, I came across a really interesting little article on this passage. Raymond Brown is a pretty famous scholar. He's a Jesuit priest and a scholar on John's Gospel. And in an article I came across, John says that my point, step up to the plate, don't hold back when the need is there, that's a minor point of the story. That's just the secondary point. He says, Brown does, that if you really want to know what the water into wine story is all about, you have to look at where John places it in the Gospel. The story is the very first thing Jesus does in his public ministry, according to John. And so, the phrase making a statement. That's what John, Raymond Brown says, is doing by putting Jesus in this scene right up front. He wants you to, know from day one what's going on. Jesus is making a statement. And according to Raymond Brown, the scholar, Jesus is saying, this is what I've come for. To turn the water of purification, the water that religious folks use to keep themselves clean and tidy and neat and held back from the world, separated from all the dirt of life. I've come to change that water for purification into the wine of celebration. That's what Brown says. I've come for people who thought that religion was mostly about staying pure, that it was a job to keep yourself, separated from all the nasty parts of life. I've come to trade that water of purification into the wine of celebration. And I thought that's really an interesting thing, I've read some other commentators just this week just to see if there was anybody else. Nobody else makes that comparison. Adam Hamilton, whose book we're going to be studying this week, he talks about this, but he says for him it was more like Jesus taking something ordinary, water, and turning it into wine. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. And certainly there are abundant biblical passages where God does exactly that, 2 fish and 5 loaves feed 5,000. The ordinary becomes extraordinary. That's a biblical theme, no question. But I think Brown is the one who's hit it on the head, because it's not ordinary water that Jesus uses. He says, I want to bring these jars for purification here and use that water, the ritual water that these very religious folks kept the cleanliness laws with. And he said, religion has to be more than just the job of keeping yourself clean. It's about celebration. It's about joy. It's about using your gifts to embrace life with a sense of love and that it's a gift that you can celebrate. You may remember years ago when we did a renovation on this building. It's been many years ago now. When it was done, it still looks great, but it was, we had it all gleamingly perfect when the renovation was done. And we did a dedication here, and we invited the bishop, at the time it was Sharon Christopher, to come and preach at the dedication. And I mean, we had every blade of grass it was perfect. It was great. And Bishop Christopher was quite impressed with the building. We gave her a tour and looked around, and so she preached at the dedication of the building. And she stood up here, right where I'm standing now, and among the things that she said, I don't remember all of it, but the part I remember is this. She says, you've given me this tour, and it all looks so wonderful, but I do hope that none of you falls into the trap of feeling like you have to be the purity police when it comes to your building. This building looks so good, and I know that it's one temptation churches have is to get so focused on keeping our buildings nice and pure and unscathed that we forget what they're supposed to be used for. This is a tool, she said. That's all it is. This is just a tool to do the work of God. This is just a tool to show the grace and the love of God. So whatever you do, don't think that your job is to keep your building pure. Your building is to be used to convey the joy and the embrace of a gracious and loving God. And I think in a way, it sort of mirrors the water into wine passage, right? Jesus is saying religion is not first and foremost about standing back and staying neat and clean. Faith isn't mainly about, faithfully doing your job of staying pure. It's a call to be joyful in light of knowing that God lives in you. I was thinking about this this week, and I was reminded, I dug through my files, and I found a story I saved from years ago. It happened one spring, it was recorded in the Christian Century, that there was an Israeli airliner that left Tel Aviv bound for London. And the flight was completely booked with basically religious travelers, people who generally fell into one of two categories. There were Jewish people who were returning home after spending the Passover in Jerusalem, and there were Christian people on their way home from celebrating Easter in the Holy Land. Basically, the whole plane was full of either Jews who'd attended Passover, Christians who'd gone to Jerusalem for Easter. No doubt, for many pilgrims, this was really kind of the culmination of a spiritual pilgrimage. One of the passengers in the article was quoted as saying, "This whole week has been for me the most deeply religious and moving experience of my life." And the author of the article said, but was it really? The answer wasn't to be found in the slides they took or the souvenirs they had in their luggage. The answer lay in what the trip had done to shape their attitude toward others, and even others of different faiths. And then he goes on to say that the real test of how authentic these folks' religious pilgrimage had been happened on that flight back to London, as word began to circulate that one of the passengers on the plane was something other than a tourist. She was a little 4-year-old girl, Maron Kadash, whose liver had seriously malfunctioned and whose life was now in jeopardy. With other medical efforts had failed in Europe, and the Israeli doctors, they took her to Jerusalem, and Israeli doctors looked at her and told her parents basically was that the only hope was for her to go to London and have this experimental treatment. And the parents, not knowing what else to do, they boarded the plane with their little daughter on to go to London, not knowing how they were going to pay for this, any of the procedures that lay ahead, and had no idea whether they could have enough funds to even have the doctor see them. So word starts to get around that this little girl, this little sick girl, is on the plane heading, and her circumstances. And as the word passed, so did somebody took off their hat and just passed the hat. And it went around, and people told the story, and they passed the hat with the story. And by the time that the hat circulated through the first class and coach cabins, $73,000 had been given for this little girl. And the piece, the author of the piece said two things astonished him about it. One is that people still had that much money left after the vacation was over. But secondly, to him, he said, it was the magnitude of the donations. There's no telethon, there's no pledge campaign, no committee meetings, no offer of a tax deduction. It was all the result of just one thing. These Jews and Christians had just taken time to go on a pilgrimage and put their faith at the forefront of their life. It was in the center of their consciousness, and then their natural impulse took over. I like that. We don't have to go to the Holy Land for that to happen. Miracles happen, I believe, when God breaks through the everyday process of each one of us, says, put me at the forefront of your life. Remember that your life is short, and what you do matters. Your decisions day by day are precious. It's too precious to stay pure and clean on the sidelines. Don't wait for others to step in. It's your compassion that's needed this day. In a sense, our hour is always at hand. Our hour has always come. And God is still calling, to you and to me to do our part to build this church that is an extension of a wedding banquet of celebration, really, where all have a place at the table and all may have enough. Really, the time for that kind of bold and faithful and just living is always now. May it ever be so.